It was supposed to be a quiet ride. Just an old man on an older motorcycle. The kind of freedom only the open road can offer. But when the engine coughed and sputtered in front of a notorious roadside bar covered in graffiti, broken neon, and roaring with bikers twice his size, he knew this pit stop could be trouble. He didn't want pity, didn't need help. He just wanted to push the bike away and disappear before anyone noticed. But someone did notice. A gang leader with tattoos like war paint and eyes that didn't flinch stared at the rusted fuel tank. At a tiny, faded symbol etched into the side. It wasn't a manufacturer's mark. It was a unit insignia. A forgotten one. One that hadn't been seen by most in decades. Suddenly, the bar went quiet. The laughter died. The gang leader stood up slowly. And then something happened no one expected. What began as a confrontation turned into a moment of honor, raw memory, and battlefield courage. A moment where an old symbol shattered stereotypes. And two very different men remembered what soldier sacrifice truly means. This is one of those real war hero stories you'll never forget. The road stretched for miles, blanketed in the golden haze of late afternoon sun. Frank Malone, 73 years old, rode alone, his hands gripping the worn handlebars of a 1968 Harley-Davidson, the same one he rode stateside. After returning from Vietnam, it had become more than a machine. It was memory, it was pain, and it was freedom. He didn't ride for attention. He rode for silence. Because for men like Frank, silence was sacred. He'd buried too many brothers to waste breath on noise. His denim jacket, sun-faded and patched at the elbows, bore no flashy logos, just a single stitched crest over his heart. 1st Recon Battalion. Most people didn't notice it. Most didn't even know what it meant. But it meant something. Frank had left his home in rural Kansas at dawn, on a simple mission, to visit the grave of his best friend, Tommy Rojas, killed in '69, just days before their last patrol. Every year, on the same date, Frank made the trip to Wyoming, rain or shine, a military tribute that no one ever saw. But this time, the bike didn't cooperate. Somewhere outside Cheyenne, the engine began to sputter, rattle, then finally gave out with a sigh that echoed deeper than it should have. Frank coasted to the side of a road that wrapped around a valley, the landscape empty, except for one building a mile ahead. It was a roadhouse. No, not just any roadhouse. Rust. Frank had heard of it in whispers. A bar where outlaw biker gangs gathered. The kind of place even locals avoided after sunset. Loud music, leather jackets, fights that never made it into police reports. He had no choice but to roll the bike slowly down the hill and toward the front of the bar. Sweat slid down the side of his temple, not from fear, but from years of knowing what happens when pride walks into danger. As he pushed the Harley across the gravel lot, the stares began. Men leaned on their choppers mid-laugh, until they saw the stranger in boots and gray stubble, dragging a half-dead bike behind him. The sound of creaking metal and crunching dirt beneath his boots seemed louder than the music inside. One voice muttered, "Wrong bar, Grandpa." Frank didn't flinch. He just kept walking slow, calm, unreadable. Inside the bar, a jukebox blasted southern rock. Pool balls cracked against each other. Beer flowed like water, and curses flew freely. But as Frank stepped through the door, everything shifted just slightly. Enough to feel it in the air. Eyes followed him. Suspicion mingled with disrespect. Some grinned. Others smirked. To them, he was just another relic. A tired man with nothing left to prove. He didn't come for trouble. He came for water. And maybe to use the phone. But fate had another plan. Sitting at the corner table, surrounded by half a dozen bikers, was a broad-shouldered man with a patch over one eye and a deep scar that curled down his neck. His name was Kutura, name earned, not given. Leader of the Iron Serpents, ex-con, dangerous. But more than that, he was watching Frank with something deeper than mockery. He stood, slowly, purposefully. His boots echoed across the wood floor. His gang fell silent behind him, and then Cutter walked right up to the Harley. Still visible outside the glass window, he pointed not at Frank, but at the fuel tank. There, just beneath the grime, was the unmistakable symbol, a scratched, faded emblem of the 1st Recon Battalion, USMC. Underneath it, barely visible anymore. Da Nang, 68. Cutter's chest rose. He didn't blink. He looked back at Frank. "Where'd you get that?" he asked, voice low and heavy. Frank answered without hesitation. "It was mine. Still is." The silence in the bar turned colder. Bikers shifted uncomfortably. Everyone expected Cutter to laugh, to taunt, maybe even to shove the old man out the door. But he didn't single quotes did. Instead, Cutter looked down. He reached under his vest and pulled out a small rusted dog tag from around his neck. It was old, worn, the letters barely legible, but the symbol, First Recon. Everything changed in that instant. Cutter didn't say a word at first. He just stepped closer and whispered, "Hill 327, you there?" Frank nodded, his voice gravel. Third day in. Tommy didn't make it out. Cutter's eyes welled. He swallowed hard and nodded. "Me neither. I mean, I did, but not all of me." That's when the gang saw something they'd never seen before. Cutter, uncheckable, brutal, feared, reached out his hand. Not to grab, not to hurt, but to salute. Right there in the bar, the toughest man in the county saluted the old veteran whose motorcycle had broken down. "Welcome home, brother," he said. The air inside the Rustwood bar was still thick. But now it wasn't tension, it was reverence. Men who had only moments ago been laughing and throwing darts now stood quietly, watching something they didn't understand. It was as if time had paused. Cutter, the feared leader of the Iron Serpents, still stood before Frank. The two men, bound by something few could ever grasp, shared blood, buried memories, and a lifetime of silence. Frank lowered his eyes as Cutter's salute dropped. He hadn't expected this. He didn't ride across state lines for recognition. That symbol on the tank, it wasn't for show. It was a reminder of pain, of a time when every breath might be your last. Cutter motioned to one of his men, a tall biker with a beard like steel wool. "Get this man a chair. And a drink. Water, nothing else." Frank didn't resist. He sat slowly. Every joint ached like it had carried a mountain. The gang gathered, curious now. The room didn't feel dangerous anymore, it felt respectful. One of the younger bikers finally asked, "What's First Recon?" Frank glanced up. His eyes were tired, but still sharp. "First Recon Battalion. United States Marine Corps. We were the ones who went in first. Scouted behind enemy lines. No backup. No rescue. We found the threat before it found the rest." The room quieted again. Frank continued. 1968 was hell. Da Nang Hill, 327. The jungle ate people alive. But we went anyway. Cutter nodded. Solemnly, "I was 19. You remember Jenkins? James Jenkins?" Frank stared at the floor. Tall kid from Ohio. Always sang Johnny Cash songs. "That's him," Cutter said. "Yeah, he didn't come home." Cutter exhaled through his nose. "Neither did my soul." Frank nodded. "That's the soldier's sacrifice. You survive, but parts of you don't." The younger bikers looked between them, unsure whether to speak or stay quiet. One finally asked, "So, how'd you both end up here? I mean, from recon missions to this?" Cutter leaned back in his chair. "War don't end when the bullets stop. Some of us come back and put on a suit. Others," he gestured to his gang, "find a different kind of family. But it's all about survival. That battlefield courage you need over there, you still need it here." Frank nodded slowly. "It's just quieter now. But the fights, they're still inside." Then, unexpectedly, Cutter turned to the jukebox and killed the music. He stood in the middle of the bar and said, "You all see that man? That's a real war hero. A forgotten hero. And if any of you ever wore a patch, swung a bat, or threw a punch and thought it made you a man, you got no idea what a man looks like until you've seen one pull his wounded buddy out of fire." The room was still. It was no longer just a story. It was a military tribute in real time. Cutter looked back at Frank. "You said you were headed to Wyoming." Frank nodded. "To visit a grave. Tommy Rojas. My best friend. I never missed the date." "What's wrong with the bike?" Cutter asked. "Fuel pump's shot. And she's old. Might take me a day to fix." Cutter turned to his crew. "We ride at sunrise." The bikers blinked. "What do you mean?" someone asked. "I mean," Cutter said, "we ride with him. All the way to Wyoming. And we stand by that grave with him. Because forgotten heroes don't walk alone. Not on my watch." Frank stared, caught between pride and humility. "You don't have to do that." Cutter smiled, not the crooked, cocky smile the gang knew, but one born from shared war. "Brother, we get to do that." Later that night, Frank was given a place to sleep in a back room of the bar. They didn't ask questions. No one mocked his age. His story spoke louder than anything they could say. Cutter sat with him one last time before lights went out. "I should have died out there," he said. "Sometimes, I wish I had. Maybe I wouldn't have messed up so much." Frank looked at him. You didn't mess up. You came back. You led. You remembered. Cutter shook his head. But I forgot to heal. Frank placed a hand on his shoulder. None of us ever fully do. The two men so different, yet so alike sit in silence again. It wasn't awkward. It was sacred. The kind of silence only war survivors understood. That night, Rustwood wasn't just a rough bar anymore. It became something more. It became a place where unsung heroes were finally seen. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when the engines roared to life. Frank stood in front of his old Harley, now freshly patched together with a mix of parts and the careful hands of bikers who usually only fixed their own. It wasn't just fixed, it was honored. The men had wiped the grime from the fuel tank, so the first recon insignia gleamed like a ghost from the past. Cutter pulled up beside him on a matte black custom chopper, the Iron Serpent's patch stitched across his back. But today, something else was stitched beneath it, a small fabric square, hand-sewn the night before. It bore the same recon symbol as Frank's tank. Frank looked at it and raised an eyebrow. Cutter smirked. Can't let you carry it alone. Behind them, 7 other bikers revved their engines in unison. They weren't just a gang anymore. They were an escort, a unit, a brotherhood reborn. The ride to Wyoming was long over 300 miles of winding roads, open plains, and silent reflection. No one spoke through their helmets. The wind did all the talking. It wasn't until they stopped for gas at a dusty station in western Nebraska that the weight of the journey hit one of the younger bikers, the newest member, tattoos on his neck, anger in his eyes. But something about Frank had shaken him. As they filled their tanks, Ricky walked over to Frank. "Can I ask you something?" Frank nodded, adjusting his gloves. "What was it like, watching your friend die?" The question wasn't meant to be cruel. It was raw, honest, and it cut through every wall Frank had carefully built over decades. He paused, looked away. I held his hand. He said softly. He was scared. But he didn't scream. He kept whispering something about his mum's garden. Tomatoes. He wanted her to know he was sorry for stealing that coin from her purse when he was 9. The group went silent. Frank's voice cracked slightly. "War doesn't kill you in one shot. It takes little pieces, one memory at a time." Ricky stared at the ground. "I never served. But my brother did. He didn't make it back from Fallujah. I never knew how to honor him." Frank looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. "You just did." Cutter watched from the side, arms crossed. He saw it happening, the transformation. The ride wasn't just for Tommy anymore. It was becoming something else. A military tribute for every soldier forgotten by time, every family left without closure, every soul still stuck in their own personal battlefield. They rode on. Somewhere outside Casper, they stopped at a roadside diner. The owner, a woman in her 60s, eyed the rough-looking crew as they walked in. But when she saw Frank, saw the patch, and heard the way the others treated him, not with mockery, but with reverence, her tone changed. She brought extra coffee. She refused to take their money. She even brought out an old photo of her father in uniform. "That was Korea," she said, voice shaking. "He never talked about it. But when I see you, I think I understand why." Frank smiled gently. "Sometimes silence is the only place we feel safe." She nodded and whispered, "Thank you for carrying it." As they left, Cutter leaned in. To Frank, "You're doing more than visiting a grave. You're lighting torches in people's hearts." Frank chuckled. "I'm just trying to keep a promise." By the time they reached the cemetery outside Cody, the sky had turned a solemn gray. The wind moved softly through the trees, like whispers of names long gone. Frank walked slowly, his legs stiff, the journey taking its toll. But his heart was steady. He stopped in front of a simple gravestone. Thomas J. Rojas, PFC USMC 1st Recon, 1949 to 1969. He never left the fight. Frank knelt, resting a hand on the top of the stone. "Hey, Tommy," he said quietly. "I brought company this time." The bikers stood back, silent, respectful. Even Cutter, hardened as he was, removed his sunglasses. Frank pulled something from his jacket, a folded flag, weathered and worn. It had traveled with him since the day Tommy died. He placed it gently at the base of the stone. "I carried this too long, brother. Time for you to keep it now." The emotion hit like a wave. Cutter turned away, swallowing hard. Ricky wiped his eyes, trying to hide it behind his arm. And then, in a moment of unscripted beauty, the entire crew stood at attention. No one told them to. No orders were given. But they stood tall, backs straight, shoulders firm, eyes forward, a silent military tribute from men who never served. to a soldier who gave everything. And when Frank gave a trembling salute, Cutter mirrored it. No words, don't know music, just honor. And in that still moment, the graveyard became a battlefield again, one, not of war, but of memory and peace. The wind whispered softly through the trees as Frank stood before Tommy's grave, the folded flag now resting beneath the carved words that had haunted him for decades. He never left the fight. But this time, something was different. He hadn't come alone. Behind him stood 8 men, bikers, outlaws to some, but now something else entirely. Brothers, witnesses, changed men. And in that stillness, every one of them understood something they'd never felt before. Honor isn't about how loud you are. It's about what you carry and who you carry it for. Frank turned slowly, his knees protesting as he rose, and looked at each man. You don't know what this means to me, he said quietly. Cutter stepped forward. No, we do. We feel it now. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single metal chain, his own dog tag, and placed it gently next to the flag. Let this rest with your brother, he said. Because no soldier should be forgotten. Not his fight. Not his story. Not his name. Frank stared, overwhelmed. His lips trembled. Why? He asked. You didn't know him. Cutter smiled, eyes wet. I didn't have to. We all fought the same war, just on different days. The younger bikers slowly followed Cutter's lead, each laying something at the base of the gravel patch. A coin, a set of gloves, little symbols of respect from men who finally understood what sacrifice really meant. It wasn't about flags waving at parades. It wasn't about medals in glass cases. It was about memory, about standing beside someone when it mattered. Frank looked down one final time. I kept you alive, Tommy. Every mile, every year. I tried to honor you in silence. But maybe you needed more than silence. He turned back to the group. And maybe I did too. That night, they didn't ride home. They built a fire near the edge of a hill, overlooking the cemetery. No alcohol, no music, just the flicker of flames and the quiet hum of crickets. Frank spoke softly under the stars. You know, I thought I was the last of us. The final keeper of stories no one wanted to hear. But I was wrong. You're the keepers now too. Cutter nodded. We'll carry them. Ricky, the youngest, finally asked. Frank, what kept you going all these years? Frank smiled faintly. A promise. And a symbol. He pointed to the emblem on his bike tank. That little mark. It's more than metal. It's battlefield courage, carved into steel. It's the story of every man who didn't get a parade. Every soldier who came home in pieces inside or out. The fire crackled. Then Ricky asked what had been burning in everyone's minds since the beginning. Frank, when your bike broke, down in front of Rustwood, were you scared? Frank chuckled. No, I was tired. But I wasn't scared. Because I've walked through darker doors than that. I've faced enemies with no face. And slept in mud beside men who bled out before the sun rose. That bar, that was just a place. But you were the test. He looked around the circle, and you passed. They sat in silence after that, not because there was nothing more to say, but because some things are better felt than spoken. By morning, when the sun broke through the Wyoming clouds, Frank stood beside his bike one last time. He touched the insignia, now brighter than it had been in years. Let's ride, he said. They didn't ask where. They didn't need to. Because now, they were carrying something bigger than themselves. They were carrying stories. They were carrying real war heroes in their hearts. They were carrying the forgotten heroes who'd paved every mile of that open road. And that symbol on Frank's tank. It had become a torch. One passed from one generation of warriors to the next.